Imagine waking up one morning to discover that your country had changed overnight. The newspapers tell only one story. Political opponents disappear. Businesses no longer belong to their owners. Your neighbor suddenly becomes an informer. And every word you speak could be repeated to the secret police. For more than 4 decades, this was life in Czechoslovakia. But how did it happen? To understand, we must return to the ruins of Europe after the Second World War. In 1945, the war had ended. Nazi occupation was over, and people longed for peace, stability, and justice. The Soviet army had helped liberate much of the country, and many Czechs and Slovaks viewed the Soviet Union as a trusted ally. The Communist Party promised equality, security, and a better future. They gained enormous popularity, winning the largest share of votes in the democratic elections of 1946. But democracy would not last. In February 1948, Communists orchestrated a political takeover known as the Victorious February. Government ministers who opposed them resigned, hoping to force new elections. Instead, Communist leader Klement Gottwald seized the opportunity. Backed by armed militias and supported by Moscow, he forced the president to accept a new government controlled almost entirely by communists. Without a single shot being fired, Czechoslovakia became part of the Soviet bloc. What followed was a complete transformation of society. Private businesses were nationalized. Factories, farms, and banks became state property. Political parties disappeared. Independent newspapers were silenced. The secret police, known as the STB, began watching citizens, listening to conversations, recruiting informers, and arresting anyone considered an enemy of the state. Thousands were imprisoned. Many were tortured. Some were executed after carefully staged political trials. One of the most shocking victims was Milada Horokova, a democratic politician who refused to submit to the regime. After a show trial watched around the world, she was executed in 1950. Her death became a symbol of communist repression. Yet despite the fear, people never stopped dreaming of freedom. By the 1960s, cracks began to appear in the system. The economy struggled. Censorship became harder to justify. Young people demanded change. In 1968, a new leader emerged, Alexander Dubček. He promised something extraordinary. Socialism with a human face. Censorship was relaxed. Open debate returned. People could finally criticize the government without immediate fear. For a few magical months, Czechoslovakia experienced hope. The world called it the Prague Spring. But the Soviet Union saw danger. If Czechoslovakia became freer, other communist countries might demand the same. On the night of August 20, 1968, more than 200,000 soldiers from the Warsaw Pact, led by the Soviet Union, crossed the borders. Thousands of tanks rolled through the streets of Prague. Citizens stood in front of armored vehicles. Some removed road signs to confuse the invading troops. Others climbed onto tanks, waving Czechoslovak flags. But courage alone could not stop an army. The reforms were crushed. The dream of a freer socialism ended almost overnight. The years that followed became known as normalization. Freedom disappeared once again. Writers were banned. Artists lost their jobs. Students were expelled from universities. Anyone who challenged the regime risked losing everything. Yet resistance survived. In apartments, churches, and underground meetings, people continued to speak the truth. One of them was playwright Václav Havel. His essays argued that even in a dictatorship, ordinary people possessed a powerful weapon, living in truth instead of fear. For those words, he was repeatedly imprisoned. But his ideas spread quietly across the country. Then came 1989. Across Eastern Europe, communist governments began collapsing. In Prague, students organized peaceful demonstrations. Hundreds became thousands. Thousands became hundreds of thousands. In Wenceslas Square, crowds jingled their keys. A simple sound carrying a powerful message. It meant, it's time to go home. Not for the people. For the communist regime. Unlike many revolutions, this one remained peaceful. It became known as the Velvet Revolution. Within weeks, communist rule collapsed. After 41 years, Czechoslovakia was free again. And the playwright once imprisoned for telling the truth, Václav Havel, became president. Communism left behind deep scars. Families divided by ideology. Lives destroyed by political persecution. A generation that grew up knowing censorship instead of free speech. Yet it also left an enduring lesson. Freedom is rarely lost all at once. It disappears piece by piece through fear, silence, and the surrender of ordinary rights. And history reminds us that preserving democracy is not only the responsibility of governments. It is the responsibility of ordinary people. Because sometimes, the most powerful revolution begins not with weapons, but with the courage to tell the truth.